I'm Michael Nichols. I run the family property here at Redbank Farming. We're at Sisters Creek, which is on the northwest coast of Tassie. We get an annual rainfall of about 1,200 mils, and we grow a multitude of different crops and livestock. So we grow 7 different crops all up. We grow potatoes, onions, poppies, pyrethrum, canola, wheat, barley, peas, which are canning peas, and buckwheat. We sort of came about this just because we're trying to fine-tune the activities that we do on farm. So we find that we're getting timings pretty right, but because we've got some fairly high input crops like potatoes and onions, our fertiliser usage is quite high. So therefore we looked at the grid mapping, and talking to a couple of the guys that were doing it, we realised that there's some opportunities there, and they're quite willing to work with us. So we came up with a 2 sample per hectare grid map rather than a 1, which most people do. We also chose the depth that we wanted to go, so we wanted to go 20 centimetres and not the 10 that they provide. And then they came in and did some mapping for us on some paddocks that had been cropped for a good 20 to 30 years. As you can see, we've got some red chocolate soil in the background, so our land is pretty consistent. We don't have variable soil types. So our starting point was to look at the soil in a grid map, and that would give us an idea of whether there was any benefits in trying to improve areas or lessen areas. So we've had quite good results from what we have been seeing. So this paddock behind us is about 17 hectares, and last year we got our Australian wheat record off this paddock after them coming in, and we fine-tuned our fertiliser prescription over it. The main aim is that from what we can gather over the 2 or 3 years we've been doing this, is we have a fertiliser budget of about $110,000, and the last 3 years we've managed to get that down to about $90,000. Just by improving or putting more fertiliser on where it's needed and a lot less where it's not needed. When we're seeing phosphorus results of say 90 Olsen P down to a 15 Olsen P in the same paddock, it suddenly starts to make you realise why those areas weren't producing as well as some of the others. Because we have quite green, lush areas, we've got a lot of grazing animals coming in from the sides, so we're finding that the wallabies and the possums are probably taking a fair bit of potash away from probably the 50-metre edge, and those areas are pretty well consistently low now. We're also finding that nutrients are moving into the hollows where the rainfall is coming. So again, we can put less fertiliser in those areas because we know that it's going to take that's going to gather the nutrients, so therefore we can sort of load the hillsides a little bit heavier to hopefully get the nutrients to the crop. The yield maps were showing us about a 40% variation across the paddock, and by looking at the grid maps we could fine-tune this, and over the last couple of years we've managed to tighten that variation to about a 20% variation, which is quite a big improvement. And it's giving us a more consistent product. So because we don't yield map our potatoes or our onions, what we're seeing is probably a pack-out benefit when they're going into the actual factories, because we're getting a more consistent size. There's no variation in that size. So by evening up the crop, it's not necessarily chasing a higher yield, it's actually trying to tighten that yield to a tighter band, and if you can get it to a tighter band, you suddenly get a better quality product as well. If I was going to be looking into doing this for the first time, you only need a few little basic things, and that is you need, what we did was we selected our best paddock, because we thought, well, if we select our best paddock, that way we already know how it produces, but let's see if there's enough variation in there to justify doing our so-called worst paddocks. And when we did that, we realised that yes, we could actually still improve them quite significantly. And you don't need a huge amount of technology to be able to do it, because once you've got your map, sometimes the variation is quite big patches. So therefore you can just go in with your normal spreader at different rates and just plot a printout through Google Earth or something and just have that sitting in the cab with you, and you just change the rates over those particular areas if you want to start off quite cheaply, and then you can start looking into a variable rate spreader to be able to do it through the GPS systems in your tractors.